For the people, by the people.
Newsfirst, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to Newsline Live. No money is a quote of choice in amazing Sri Lanka in these days. The people are coming onto the streets, onto the roads, obviously for several reasons. They usually would have much better things to do than come out on the street in protests, in a form of dissent. There are several reasons. If you took the students, for example, or others, we'll come to the students in a minute, people simply can't afford to live on 5,000 rupees a month. Students, for example, by the way, that 5,000 rupees is approximately $13.50 in today's exchange rates per month. So there's not even $1 a day. Students in their canteen, their lunch, their meal, they've seen it rise from 40 rupees to 90 rupees, and that's for an all-vegetarian version of their lunch. So no one can live with 5,000 rupees. And so no money is a quote, not of choice, but of necessity. This evening, to discuss various aspects of the right to protest and I suppose the growing authoritarianism in Sri Lanka is Thyagi Ruwanpathirana from Amnesty International Southeast Asia. Very good evening to you, Ms. Thyagi, and welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So what exactly is Amnesty International concerned of here in Sri Lanka?
A number of things, but since we're talking about the right to protest today, it's, since the beginning of this year, I would say around February, March, when people started coming onto the road, that's because of the economic concerns they've had. They've had, issues trying to find gas. They've had issues trying to find fuel. There are power outages, medicine shortages. And so all of those frustrations built up. Yeah. And they came onto the roads in protest. And those protests have, sustained themselves for now so many months, more than 7-8 months now. And I mean, there was one protest just yesterday as well. So as Amnesty International, we've been concerned about the kind of freedom that people have to express freely, to be able to peacefully assemble, their freedom of association. So those have been some of our key concerns this year.
And isn't it amazing that Amnesty International here in Sri Lanka, and today that you're here, one of the reasons we asked you to come here was that in the last few days we had what we call the forgotten prisoners. And the founder of Amnesty International, Peter Brennison, founded Amnesty International after he took on, all those years ago, something on the same lines, the forgotten prisoners. I don't think that it can get more ironic than that.
I mean, we were started in the 1960s, and Peter Brennison started Amnesty because he saw these prisoners who had really gone out of everyone's radars. And people started writing letters to government saying they should release them. And here we are in 2022, and in Sri Lanka, the PTA, the Prevention of Terrorism Act, has been used against so many people, especially the minority communities, first starting with the Tamils, then the Muslims, and now also against dissidents or people who are speaking out against government, to detain them, and that's for a very prolonged period without charge. And yes, so out of the 3 people who were arrested in a couple of months ago, one person was already, Hashan was already released without charges, but two people, Sri Dhammathera, who's a convener of the Inter-University Bhikkhu Federation, and Vasantha Mudalige, who has now become a household name,
Indeed.
the IUSF convener, have been now detained under the PTA for 75 days without charge.
Do we know where they're held?
Yes, so they were initially held in the south, but now they're in Colombo.
And so do you know what the conditions are? Have you been able to visit them? Or their legal crew, have they been able to visit?
Their legal crew has been in touch, but they don't get as much access as they'd like. Sri Dhammathero was going through some ailments as well, and then they brought him to Colombo, and he had also gotten dengue in the process.
Right.
And I think there were issues with the family being able to access the detained prisoners. So that's been a worry as well, which are generally, you know, internationally accepted safeguards and rights that prisoners also have. These are, I mean, prisoners meaning they're detainees, they're not charged.
And of course we've had others too. We've had the case, I was going to say the strange case of Mr. Hijaz Hizbullah. So what exactly is going on in his life now?
So Hijaz Hizbullah, Amnesty International has declared him a prisoner of conscience because we've gone through the case. We can't find any evidence that there has been some internationally recognizable crime that he's committed. So he was arrested in 2020 on the 14th of April, if I'm not mistaken. And he was detained for almost 2 years, I want to say, or 1.5 years. And then he was released on bail. So the case is still dragging on, and that's the annoying part about any case, right? So that you can come out on bail, but the case sort of looms over you. You're still harassed
Sort of
by the
Democles
state. Exactly. So it's like, if you give too many media interviews, then do you get called up? Like, you know, what's going to happen to your case? So those kind of restrictions, like your assets are frozen, there's definitely a travel ban on most of them. You can't basically resume any of your livelihoods. And
eventually, if they decide, if they are man enough to decide that they're not going to carry on because, you know, their investigations have come up with zilch, is there provision at the end of this awful period to make provision for reparations, financial ones?
There are, but it's very rare that, like, also the state really carries out these, you know, the court would enforce reparations, but whether that would be carried out, and again, it's not much. He's a well-known lawyer, so imagine the livelihood he's lost in, you know, all the number of months and years he spent in detention.
Has his reparations not caught up with inflation?
I don't think so.
So, but it's, you know, it's not really a matter that we are not making light of it, but it's the ironic nature of this. So would it be fair to say, Thyagi Ruwanpathirana, from Amnesty International Southeast Asia, would it be fair to say that agencies such as Amnesty International are noticing a growing sense of authoritarianism, or a return to a growing sense of authoritarianism?
Yes, we've been following Sri Lanka's human rights development for a very long time. I mean, actually, Amnesty was here in the 80s as well.
So is this a worthwhile office to have here in Sri Lanka? Does it generate enough work to keep you and your colleagues gainfully employed?
I mean, yes, definitely. I mean, from here, we work on the whole region, so it's not just on Sri Lanka that we work on.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good, because you're probably attracting some dollars into this country then.
Definitely, yes.
That's good. So which other countries in the region do you serve out of here?
So I'll explain a little bit about the process. So Amnesty, you know how human rights is always seen as a Western concept that, you know, the white men preaching.
Yeah.
So Amnesty decided a couple of years ago to change that narrative and that perspective altogether. You know, it's not a London headquartered body anymore. We've moved to the ground.
Right.
And that means there are 18 regional offices around the world. The London office shrunk. And so that means the work that Amnesty produces is actually now happening in the regions. So from the Colombo regional office, we work on Bangladesh, we work on India, Pakistan, Nepal, a little bit of Bhutan, Maldives, Afghanistan as well. Yeah.
So thank you very much for your questions, by the way. SMS or WhatsApp 0772 300 305, and please don't telephone the number now. It's merely messaging, WhatsApp or SMS 0772 300 305. Thyagi, many people are asking this question. Why do governments, I'm not talking of just Sri Lanka because it happens all over, why do governments engage in these sort of activities which are clearly and blatantly troubling the people? And in any country, surely, that practices democracy, the people are first.
It's just inconvenient for the government to have any of the decisions they've taken that people are now questioning because they're bad decisions, or any sort of accountability that people are asking for, be it economic related, be it on criminal justice related. They just don't want to be held accountable. So when people come onto the road and start protesting, that affects their, the chances of them being elected again. So that's really why they want, no noise or the limited amount of disruptions to their work, and people questioning them is not something most governments take lightly.
Is it inconvenient? Well, I suppose you answered that. It's inconvenient because it doesn't fit with whatever policy that they're pursuing at that time. But do you also agree that when the people when the economy is robust and it's doing well, and probably the people are so busy enjoying life as it should be, that people don't really pay too much attention to the way the government is spending their taxes and so on. But when day in and day out governments, like in Sri Lanka, asking the people to tighten their belts, tighten, but the fancy projects go on, the sugar daddy deals go on, and the politicians, we don't see them making, it's not apparent to me anyway, they don't seem to be making any cuts. We don't see them tightening their belts. Various functions still carry on. The trappings of political power and life carry on. So is it a surprise that the people now say, listen, things are really bad, we want to know, we want to be managed better? Is that what it is at the crux of this whole problem?
I believe it is, because I think the people who were also relatively okay or accepting of a level of corruption, because we've seen in 2015 there was a huge change in government,
yes,
and then the people voted these same people back. So that also speaks to the fact that people were okay, are accepting of a certain level of corruption, but when it started really hitting them, they were like, no, this is not okay. And they realized that, that injustice that they feel, the fact that, like you said, so many sort of luxuries that most people in power have, VIPs have, that they don't have, and they're tightening their belts. Why are they the only ones making sacrifices? That's definitely what's brought them to the streets.
Indeed. And of course, when they come home and they found 10-hour power cuts in place, and then they'd spend an inordinate amount of time in various queues for gas, queues for petrol, and of course somebody now will say, and I'm half expecting it, that there are no queues now. consumption is down 40%. The economy is down from $85 billion to between 60 and 65. So everything's contracted, but these other lifestyle, there is no change. Tell me, Thyagi, how concerned was Amnesty International when they found that various people, especially these prisoners who were convicted under the PTA, actually spent far longer than their convicted amount of time in prison, and in a way sort of forgotten?
I mean, the PTA, so it's been in the book since 1979. It's 40 odd years of injustice, and each government since then have been using this against minorities, against journalists, against basically anyone who questions government. You must remember Thisanayagam's case.
Absolutely.
So similarly, I mean, Hejaz is one case, but then people who don't have the privileges of Hejaz, right? For example, Anaf Jazim, he's a poet who was also, they tried to link him to Hejaz's case. He was detained also for years. And he's got out, but now he's put on this prescribed list as a terrorist. So, you know, the bail, even though they're out on bail, they can't really do much. So really we should be pushing to drop these cases if you don't have any credible evidence that will withstand the test of in a court of law. So yes, I think the fact that so many people have been persecuted under this PTA, the fact that international organizations, the fact that victims, the fact that now mainstream political parties are calling for its repeal, I'm not sure what we're really waiting for, because the EU, the GSP plus concessions are also looking at the PTA reform agenda, and they want it gone or reformed to a point where, you know, the main issues with the law are properly addressed.
They're probably waiting for Godot. On that note, let's take a quick break and look at the headlines from this evening's primetime news. We'll see you on the other side of the break.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
News First headlines. Main sponsor.
Anka ege arakshita itigini petti. Surya gini petti.
Pakistan's Imran Khan injured in apparent assassination attempt.
He was put in that vehicle and taken a key minister to...
Parliament slow in implementing proposals to bring about far-reaching systematic change, President tells Speaker. Key round of discussions on restructuring Sri Lanka's debt. Russia's Azur Air lands with 300 plus passengers. Granting approval to temporarily suspend the import of bathware is an injustice to the consumer. A statement from the Committee of Public Finance. Pakistan beats South Africa to keep semis' hopes alive.
News First headlines. Main sponsor.
Anka ege arakshita itigini petti. Surya gini petti.
25% for 2 months, 25.5% for 4 months. Valuable FD.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.
And welcome back to Newsline Live. I'm in conversation this evening with Thyagi Ruwanpathirana from Amnesty International Southeast Asia. Thyagi, tell me, these restrictions on the protesters, are there any of the restrictions that are necessary? Which ones are particularly bad? The floor's all yours, really.
So when it comes to the freedom to express yourself or to peacefully assemble, that's a right that's guaranteed by international law. There's the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights. That's a that's a global convention that everyone has signed on to, including Sri Lanka. And that's also enshrined in Sri Lanka's own domestic constitution. There are restrictions on these rights in that they're not absolute rights. There are absolute rights that you can't derogate from, like, you know, freedom from torture and things like that, even in a state of emergency. But things like this can be restricted. But those restrictions have a three-part test. First is that it has to be legal, in that it has to be provided by law. The second is that it has to be necessary. And then the third is that it has to be proportionate. So which of these three things, say for example, yesterday's protest, the police had given letters to key protest organizers saying they don't give permission for this protest to go ahead. So by international law, there's no requirement for protesters to giving notice. It could be done just as an FYI, we're going to be on this road. There could be issues with vehicular movement. But there's no, you're not asking for permission, because that would mean you're asking for permission to carry out your basic fundamental rights, which are guaranteed by the Constitution. So there's no such thing. But so what the police letter did was try and say that this is going to be an unlawful assembly. So what we said was that actually then it has to fulfill the three-part test. What was the legitimate reason for restricting or stopping this protest? So the letter said a few things, that it could cause inconvenience to the public. It said that tourists could get affected and things like that. But really, those aren't legitimate restrictions. Restrictions have to have a good reason. It could be a public health reason, a genuine national security threat, public order issue. But I went to observe the protest yesterday. I mean, there was none of that planned, and none of that happened. It was a completely peaceful protest, and that's a fundamental right. So if you go and restrict that, that's not actually legal.
So, and what action can be taken against the police officers who were present there and trying to sabotage the protest?
So the thing is, if the police took, you know, if they resorted to excessive force or something like that, then that can be challenged. But also the fact is that, you know, this letter came out early yesterday when the protest was planned for something like 3 p.m. So that didn't give a lot of time in any case. And it wasn't a court order, it was a letter.
Written by?
The police.
By the police.
Yeah, because if it was a court order, then maybe that is it legal test could be fulfilled. But, I suppose it also speaks to the fact that the police didn't go to the court, or the court didn't give any order against the protest, means that the judiciary or the legal community also understands that these restrictions on fundamental rights aren't legitimate.
And Thyagi, how do governments respond to your efforts, the efforts of Amnesty International? How do governments respond?
It depends on the government.
Okay. So some governments have been more amenable than others?
Definitely, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anywhere in the world where Amnesty International has gone to court, taken the government of the day to court as a violation of somebody's fundamental rights?
Yes. So we also appear as amicus in other people's cases, but so that means that, you know, it's not the government, but somebody in government would be a respondent in a case. So yes, we've done that. Not in Sri Lanka, though, not yet at least.
Is your team of lawyers the battery? Do you have a battery of lawyers?
We have a legal team, yes.
Right. So are they preparing, do you think? Are they on standby?
For Sri Lanka matters, not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that because not enough of police action is being taken against the people, or is it some other reason?
I think our focus on the right to protest in Sri Lanka has been in a more preventive capacity. For example, now we've started sending independent observers to protests so that, you know, we're visible on the ground. Not just us, I think the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka did the same yesterday. So we're serving a different function. We're not looking at going to court right now.
Right.
But I'm hoping that it will have some kind of impact. So, you know, there are different kinds of ways the state has been cracking down on protests. There have been restrictions on the right to movement by, you know, curfews. There have been emergency regulations. I think there have been about, what, 3 versions just this year. People have been apprehended, people have been dragged off buses, they've been arrested without even saying what they're being arrested for. They've been also bringing back fears of enforced disappearances, and that's serious for a country like Sri Lanka with such a huge backload of missing people, disappeared people. So, and of course, there are instances of ill treatment, there's alleged torture in detention of these people who've been protesting. Even journalists have been attacked.
Have you found it strange that in a number of cases, when after the police have arrested someone and they take this person along to look for some evidence or other, and that person ends up dying because he's shot, because apparently he tried to escape?
We've seen a lot of those, we call them extrajudicial executions in a way, because, and they're very, very common, I would say, with drug-related cases. You know, somebody's been taken out of detention to show the police where some armory was, exactly. And then they're shot in the process because they tried to escape. And that's always the media narrative. Of course, we need to look into this, and others have looked into it much more than we have. But it's a pattern, you know, that these cases, people are just bumped off. And
how will Amnesty International make a change? What plans do you all have for Sri Lanka?
I mean, our work sort of, you know, looks at all kinds of human rights. So it's not just civil political rights. Right now, we're also looking quite a bit at the economic crisis about, you know, the right to food, right to health, right to social protection, and things like that. You know, some of the schemes about the debt. So there are different ways in which we're approaching human rights in Sri Lanka. Like, so on the economic, social, cultural rights, we're also engaging and asking the international community to basically cut Sri Lanka some slack, because you need debt cancellation, you need support from the creditors and people like that to help Sri Lanka out of this situation. So we're doing that as well. But of course, on the PTA, on people's right to protest, that has been a big concern for us as well.
Thank you, Thyagi, for that. But finally, what would you say to all those people out there who actually are not put off by government action, police action? They're not put off, and who have every intention of protesting when they feel that they must protest. What advice?
People have a right to protest. That's a fundamental right guaranteed by Sri Lanka's own constitution, but also under Sri Lanka's international obligations, including the ICCPR. And those obligations also get reviewed, by the way, and the review is coming up next year, the CCPR review. Those are things that people are born with. Human rights is, at the end of the day, it's not a privilege to be able to protest. You should be allowed to go and voice your frustrations, and those are, you know, basic human needs in a way. So, I mean, it's not for us to say what's a right protest, what's a wrong protest, what's legitimate, what's not. At the end of the day, we are behind your rights, and that's what it is.
The people will be fortified by the knowledge that organizations such as yours are right there.
I hope so.
Thank you very much, Thyagi Ruwanpathirana. And here's a suggestion from our production team. Why don't you put down your appointment on your mobile phones, 8:30, Monday to Friday, Newsline Live, from News First. Take care and have a great evening ahead of you, and as always, God bless you all.